At 3 a.m. in a Chicago trauma unit, the room does not ask whether you're arrested. The neon light flickers. The smell of antiseptic and cold steel hangs in the air. In your hand is a fine gauge syringe, small enough to seem almost harmless, serious enough to demand the whole mind. This is where authority gets stolen. Not by the patient. Not by the monitor. Not by the hour. Not even by the exhaustion that has been following you from one shift into the next. It is stolen when the first impression arrives and you give it command before you examine it. The impression says, this moment owns you. The judgment says, if this goes wrong, your worth goes with it. The trap says, move from panic, answer from fatigue, let pressure speak before reason does. Epictetus would cut that chain at the point of assent. The event is one thing. Your judgment about it is another. The medicine may be urgent. Your ruling faculty must not be rushed into slavery. The syringe is not asking for fear. It is asking for attention. The first boundary in that room is not drawn by the hospital. It is not drawn by the clock. It is not drawn by the patient's condition, the staffing shortage, the unanswered messages, the supervisor's expectations, or the fact that your body has already been working longer than it should. The first boundary is drawn inside the mind. Epictetus begins there because confusion begins there. A person sees an event, feels the pressure of it, and then quietly hands authority to something that never had the right to command the soul. In the trauma unit, the event is plain: medicine must be administered. A fine gauge syringe is in the nurse's hand. The unit is busy. The hour is late. The lights flicker. The smell of antiseptic and cold steel sharpens the senses. That is the event. But the mind does not stop at the event. It adds, this is too much. It adds, I cannot afford one mistake. It adds, if this goes badly, it will say something final about me. It adds, my exhaustion is stronger than my judgment. It adds, this room has authority over my worth. Now the danger has changed. The danger is no longer only in the external situation. The danger is in false rule. The mind has mistaken pressure for command. A Stoic does not deny the pressure. Denial is not discipline. The medicine matters. The task matters. Accuracy matters. Duty matters. But none of these facts prove that the outcome belongs to you. None of them prove that another person's reaction belongs to you. None of them prove that reputation, timing, paperwork, memory, fatigue, or the whole machinery of the hospital has ownership over your ruling faculty. What is yours? Your judgment. Your assent. Your intention. Your attention. Your next response. That is not a slogan. That is the working line. Your hand may be tired, but attention is still yours to govern. Your shift may be unfair, but intention is still yours to govern. The room may be loud, but assent is still yours to govern. The outcome may matter deeply, but your moral purpose is not measured by whether events obey you. This is where many people lose themselves. Not because they do not care, but because they care without distinction. They care about the task, then they accidentally care about controlling everything around the task. They care about doing their duty, then they begin demanding certainty. They care about the patient, then they begin treating the result as a verdict on their entire person. That is not responsibility. That is confusion wearing responsibility's uniform. Responsibility means you take command of what is actually yours. It does not mean you claim ownership of what belongs to nature, time, biology, other minds, systems, accidents, and the limits of human reach. The nurse at 3 a.m. must understand this with brutal clarity. The medicine is in front of you. The syringe is in your hand. Your training, your attention, your check, your steadiness, your next movement, these are within the boundary. The final outcome is not. The timing of the emergency is not. The number of people waiting is not. The administrator's opinion is not. The memory of your last hard shift is not. Whether exhaustion appears in the body is not fully yours. Whether exhaustion becomes ruler of the mind, that is where the work begins. So the correction is not, feel nothing. That would be foolish. The correction is, do not let the feeling legislate. There is the smell of antiseptic. Let it be smell. There is cold steel. Let it be cold steel. There is urgency. Let it be urgency. There is fatigue. Let it be fatigue. There is the fine gauge syringe. Let it bring the mind back to the point of action. The mind says, I am burned out. Name it. The mind says, this is personal. Examine it. The mind says, this outcome owns me. Refuse assent. You do not need a speech in that moment. You need command. Not over the room. Over the judgment forming inside you. A person becomes unfree when an external thing is treated as supreme. Exhaustion becomes supreme. Reputation becomes supreme. The possible outcome becomes supreme. The imagined criticism becomes supreme. Then the ruling faculty is pushed down like a servant, told to move, speak, fear, rush, freeze, or resent according to whatever impression arrives first. Epictetus would call that slavery. Not because the nurse is weak. Because the mind is given authority away. The boundary of control is not meant to make the nurse indifferent to duty. It is meant to make duty possible. A scattered mind cannot serve well. A mind begging the outcome for permission to stand upright cannot serve well. A mind that thinks every external event has the power to define its worth cannot serve well. So return to the small visible fact. The syringe. Not the whole night. Not the whole career. Not every past mistake. Not every future consequence. This syringe. This medicine. This check. This breath. This next governed action. The boundary is narrow. That is its strength. You are not being asked to command the universe from a hospital floor at 3 a.m. You are being asked to refuse false authority. You are being asked to keep your judgment clean while the room is not calm. You are being asked to let the event be serious without letting it become sovereign. The medicine may be urgent. Your assent must still be examined. The medicine may be urgent. Your assent must still be examined. This is the point most people miss. They think the crisis begins in the room. Epictetus would say the crisis begins in the judgment. The room presents itself. The mind answers it. Between those two is the place where freedom is either kept or surrendered. The trauma unit gives the nurse an impression. It does not ask permission. It arrives fast. The lights flicker. The air smells of antiseptic. Steel is cold against the hand. The fine gauge syringe is ready. A life-saving medicine has to be given with precision. The hour is 3 a.m. The body is tired. The mind has already spent itself on other rooms, other orders, other voices, other alarms, other demands. Then the first appearance comes forward. This is urgent. This is too much. This cannot go wrong. This moment will judge me. This exhaustion has the right to decide how I move. But an impression is not yet a command. That distinction is everything. An impression is the first report. It says, here is how the thing appears. It may be loud. It may be physical. It may come with a tight chest, a clenched jaw, a faster hand, a sharper tone. It may feel like truth because it arrives before language. But speed is not authority. Force is not authority. Vividness is not authority. The mind must not kneel just because an appearance enters the room. Judgment is the next step. Judgment says what the impression means. The event is medicine being administered. Judgment says, this determines my worth. The event is exhaustion in the body. Judgment says, I cannot govern myself now. The event is pressure in the unit. Judgment says, the room owns my attention. The event is uncertainty about outcome. Judgment says, unless I can control the result, I am not safe. That is where the false chain is built. Not at the syringe. Not at the medicine. Not at the hour. At the meaning assigned to them. The nurse does not lose authority because the room is busy. The nurse loses authority when the mind agrees that the room has the right to rule the inner faculty. That agreement may happen quickly. It may happen silently. No one else sees it. A hand reaches. A word is spoken. A movement speeds up. A pause disappears. But underneath the action, assent has already been given. Assent means the mind says yes. Yes, this impression is true. Yes, this exhaustion is sovereign. Yes, this pressure has command. Yes, this outcome will define me. Yes, this external thing outranks my judgment. That is the trap. It is not simply that the nurse is tired. Tiredness is an event in the body. It has weight. It has consequences. It must be respected. But the trap is deeper. The trap is letting tiredness become a judge. Letting it decide the next word. Letting it decide whether the movement is rushed or clean. Letting it decide whether attention stays with the syringe or scatters into fear, resentment, reputation, and imagined blame. Exhaustion says, I am here. A trained mind answers, you are here. You are not king. That is Stoic discipline. Not pretending the impression does not exist. Not dressing it up. Not making the nurse perform calmness for the room. Discipline is the refusal to confuse an appearance with a verdict. The event says, there is a serious action to perform. The impression says, this is threatening. The judgment says, my worth is under attack. The assent trap says, obey the fear. The Stoic correction says, stop. Name it. Separate it. Return. Return to the syringe. Not because the syringe is magical. Because it is present. It is specific. It is within the field of action. It gives attention a place to stand. The mind cannot govern the entire hospital, the history of the shift, the reactions of other people, the possible result, the future review, the reputation that may follow. But it can return to the visible task. Look. Check. Breathe. Administer with care. Speak only what duty requires. Move neither from panic nor resentment. Let the next action be chosen, not dragged out of you by the first impression. This is how authority is protected. You do not argue with the impression as if it were an enemy. You do not need to win a debate against every feeling. You only need to deny it automatic rule. The impression can appear. The judgment must be inspected. Assent must be withheld until reason has looked. That small delay is not weakness. It is command. In that delay, the nurse becomes more than a body under pressure. More than a role under judgment. More than a tired professional trying to survive another impossible hour. The nurse becomes a rational agent again, standing at the narrow gate where Epictetus places freedom. The room may still be loud. The medicine may still be urgent. The outcome may still be uncertain. Exhaustion may still press against the mind. But the final authority over assent has not been given away. Now the question becomes practical. Not what you admire. Not what you quote. Not what sounds noble after the shift is over. What do you practice in the room when the impression is moving faster than your reasoning? That is ascesis. Training. Not punishment. Not performance. Training. For Epictetus, philosophy is not decoration for quiet hours. It is a discipline for the moment when the hand wants to hurry, the voice wants to sharpen, the mind wants to surrender to the first appearance. The trauma unit at 3 a.m. is not an interruption of Stoic practice. It is where the practice is tested. The fine gauge syringe is in the nurse's hand. The medicine must be administered. The room does not become calm just because the mind needs clarity. So the training must be small enough to use under pressure. First, pause before assent. Not a long pause. Not a theatrical pause. Not a pause that neglects duty. A governed pause. The kind that happens inside one breath. Before the mind says yes to the impression, it creates a narrow space. The impression says, this is too much. Pause. The impression says, you are too tired to be steady. Pause. The impression says, if this outcome turns badly, you are condemned. Pause. That pause is not empty. It is the place where authority is recovered. Second, name the impression. Silence can be dangerous when it lets the false judgment hide. Name it plainly. This is an impression of threat. This is an impression that exhaustion is in command. This is an impression that the outcome defines me. Naming does not remove the event. It removes the disguise. The mind stops treating the impression as reality itself and begins seeing it as an appearance presented to judgment. That is a different posture. The nurse is no longer swallowed by the room. The nurse is observing what the room has produced in the mind. Third, separate the event from the judgment. The event, a patient needs medicine. The event, the unit is busy. The event, the hour is late. The event, the body is exhausted. The event, the syringe is ready. The judgment, this proves I am unsafe. The judgment, this proves I cannot govern myself. The judgment, this proves the hospital owns my mind. The judgment, this proves my worth is on trial. Separate them. Do not mix them. A serious event does not require a corrupt judgment. An urgent task does not require panic. A tired body does not require surrender. A difficult room does not require the mind to become disorderly. This is ascesis, the repeated act of dividing what appears from what is being added. Most people train after the damage. They replay the scene in the car. They argue with themselves in the parking lot. They think of what they should have said while standing at the kitchen table hours later. That reflection may teach something, but Stoic training aims earlier. It aims at the instant before assent. The instant before the hand rushes. The instant before the words become sharp. The instant before fatigue turns into resentment. The instant before responsibility mutates into the demand for control over outcomes. In that instant, the nurse returns attention to the anchor. The fine gauge syringe. This is not escape. It is concentration. The mind cannot hold the entire hospital at once. It was never built to govern the entire chain of consequences. So it returns to the governable point. The hand. The check. The medicine. The next movement. The next word. The next refusal to obey panic. Ascesis is not vague self-improvement. It is precise obedience to reason under conditions that tempt the mind to abandon reason. The nurse does not need to feel heroic. That is another trap. Heroic identity can become just as dangerous as fear. It says, I must be the one who holds everything together. Then the role becomes another external idol. Another thing inflated above the ruling faculty. Another way to confuse duty with self-image. The Stoic correction is colder and cleaner. Do the work that belongs to you. Do not steal the work that belongs to fate. You may prepare. You may check. You may focus. You may speak clearly. You may ask for help when duty requires it. You may refuse the inner lie that exhaustion has more authority than judgment. But you may not command the final outcome as if nature were your employee. Training means rehearsing that boundary until it appears when needed. Not only in the trauma unit. At the inbox. In the meeting. During the phone call. At the kitchen table when bills are open and patience is thin. In traffic when the body is tired and the mind wants an excuse to become small. The practice is the same because the structure is the same. Event. Impression. Judgment. Assent. Action. The world provides the event. The senses receive it. The first impression rises. Judgment interprets it. Assent either crowns it or refuses it. Then action follows. If assent is careless, action becomes dragged. If assent is examined, action becomes chosen. At 3 a.m., the nurse's freedom is not in making the room easy. It is in keeping the ruling faculty from becoming an instrument of the room's chaos. That is the exercise. That is the discipline. That is the work hidden inside the syringe. That is the work hidden inside the syringe. But work is not complete because the mind understands a principle. It is complete only when conduct follows it. Stoicism does not leave the nurse standing in private clarity while duty waits on the table. It brings judgment back into action. The question is not, how do I feel about this moment? The question is, what does this moment require from what is mine to govern? At 3 a.m., in the flickering light of a Chicago trauma unit, responsibility is not a grand emotion. It is not the story the nurse tells about sacrifice. It is not the bitterness of being overworked. It is not the fear of being blamed. Responsibility is the disciplined use of attention, intention, judgment, and action where they are actually available. The fine gauge syringe is not a symbol for control over life and death. That would be too large. That would make the external supreme. The syringe is a test of conduct. Will the nurse move from examined attention, or from the first pressure of exhaustion? That is the question. Exhaustion may say, cut the corner. Duty says, check what must be checked. Fear may say, hurry so the pressure will end. Duty says, move at the pace accuracy requires. Reputation may say, look certain so no one doubts you. Duty says, be clear, not theatrical. Resentment may say, you should not have to carry this. Duty says, do the next right act without making resentment your commander. This is not softness. It is stricter than emotion. Emotion wants the room to justify the reaction. Stoic duty asks whether the reaction is fit for the work. A nurse can be tired and still speak with steadiness. A nurse can be under pressure and still refuse a careless movement. A nurse can be surrounded by urgency and still distinguish between speed and panic. A nurse can know that the outcome is not fully hers and still give complete attention to the part that is. That distinction is moral discipline. Some people hear not in your control and mistake it for withdrawal. They think it means caring less, doing less, risking less, standing farther away from duty. That is not Epictetus. The boundary of control is not an excuse to abandon responsibility. It is the only way responsibility stays clean. When you confuse responsibility with control over outcomes, you become frantic. When you confuse responsibility with reputation, you become false. When you confuse responsibility with exhaustion, you become ruled. When you confuse responsibility with certainty, you become brittle. But when responsibility is placed where it belongs, conduct becomes possible. The nurse is responsible for the quality of attention brought to the medicine. Responsible for the care of the hand. Responsible for the honesty of the check. Responsible for the words spoken to another person in the room. Responsible for asking, confirming, pausing, moving, and refusing to let a harsh inner judgment drive the act. The nurse is not responsible for rewriting the hour. Not responsible for making the unit quiet. Not responsible for making the past shift disappear. Not responsible for guaranteeing how the body will respond. not responsible for controlling every opinion that may form later. This does not make the work smaller. It makes the work exact. A clean boundary produces clean conduct. You stop spending the mind on what cannot be governed, and that energy returns to what can. The hand steadies because attention has been recalled from imagined blame. The voice lowers because reputation has lost its throne. The next movement becomes simpler because the mind is no longer trying to carry the entire future. That is why Epictetus keeps returning to the ruling faculty. Not because external things do not matter, but because the ruling faculty is the place from which you meet them. If that place is surrendered, even noble work becomes disordered. If that place is guarded, even a harsh room can be met with upright action. The nurse does not need the room to become fair before practicing virtue. Fairness is not always available at 3 a.m. Clarity is. Not perfect clarity. Not comfort. Not ease. But enough clarity to say, this is the event. This is the impression. This is the judgment trying to attach itself. This is the assent I must not give. This is the next action that belongs to me. Then act. Not with drama. Not with self-pity. Not with the private demand that the world recognize how hard the shift has been. Act because duty is in front of you and the governing part has not been sold to fatigue. There is dignity in that. A plain dignity. Not applause. Not mythology. The dignity of a person who does not wait for perfect conditions before becoming responsible. The syringe is in the hand. The medicine is ready. The room is loud. The body is tired. None of that gives exhaustion the right to rule the next response. Conduct begins where false authority ends. Conduct begins where false authority ends. And freedom begins there too. Not the freedom of an easy shift. Not the freedom of perfect staffing, perfect timing, perfect outcomes, or a body that never reaches its limit. Those are not promised. They were never promised. The freedom Epictetus points to is harder and closer. It is the freedom not to let the first impression become master. It is the freedom to stand in a room that presses the senses and still say, this is an appearance, not a command. The nurse at 3 a.m. does not need to own the whole night. That is too much for any person. The nurse needs to own the next act of judgment. The syringe is in the hand. The medicine is ready. The smell of antiseptic and cold steel is present. The body is tired. The room is urgent. But the ruling faculty is not property of the room. That is the authority you must not give away. Not in a hospital. Not at your desk. Not in your home. Not when bills are due, someone is angry, your reputation feels exposed, or your mind is worn down from carrying more than one day should hold. The event may be serious. Let it be serious. The duty may be demanding. Meet it. The outcome may be uncertain. Do not pretend otherwise. But do not add the false judgment that the external thing has the right to define your worth or command your assent. Pause. Name the impression. Separate it from the event. Choose the next governed action. Return to what is yours to govern.